Doctors of Reddit, what made you say, how the fuck is this person still alive? An lucky guy forgot his keys and was climbing back into his own apartment through the window. His friend thought that he was an intruder and pointed a gun at him and pulled the trigger. As the lucky guy opened his mouth to say, "Don't shoot," the bullet went into his mouth and clean exited the back of his neck. After surgery, he was totally fine in a few days. Somehow missed all major structures. Didn't even chip a tooth. Really pissed at his cousin. From my neurosurgery rotation in med school. Edit. Thanks for my first silver and gold. My second most upvoted comment has 33 votes. So 37K is pretty surprising. Unlike the bullet, this comment hit a nerve. Edit 2. I didn't delve into why, but for some reason the patient didn't know that his cousin was in the patient's apartment, and the patient assumed that he was locked out. Edit 3. I think I have a poor sense of what is interesting in medicine to the general public. This was interesting enough for me to remember her from med school. Definitely made it to. Med students can't help talking about medicine even at parties. But it never struck me as that interesting. Edit 4. This has forced me to learn how to do a hard return. Edit 5. Maybe too many edits is rude. Relatively untutored in the ways of Reddit. Really pissed at his cousin. That's free beer for life. Hey cousin, you remember when you shot me with a gun? You get this round. Edit. Rip my inbox and thank you so much for my first silver. Remember that time I got that round? Yeah, you get this round too. Skirts beer at him out of neck hole. A guy the first know with cancer smokes 2 packs a day and drinks a 5th of Fireball every day. He lives in a trailer so dirty there is a ½ inch of dirt according to his wife's mother. He recovered from surgeries in that trailer. Eventually we got word he was quitting chemo and was just going to accept death. 5 years ago he was given 2 months to live. He is now completely cancer-free. Life is just weird sometimes. When I was in college, there was a kid that exited a freeway at near freeway speed. Problem was, it was a construction zone at night, no lights, and it wasn't supposed to be an open exit. Drove right into a pile of rebar. One of the poles went through the car into his face and pinned him to the seat through his head. A couple of years later, I was in grad school, in anatomy seminar, and the surgeon presented that kid's case as a study. Not only did he live, the rebar had slid right past the base of the brain, spinal column. It was so close, they had to twist it out like a screw because the ribbing on the bar threatened nerve damage. They literally rebuilt this kid's skull around his brain. His recovery photo was a totally normal kid smiling. He had a small scar on his chin. I say kid, but he was like 17. Just to be clear. Edit. A couple of people looked up the story and posted it in the responses. For the curious, be warned. There is one photo you may find disturbing. I had some minor details wrong, but I hope I'm forgiven since it was 15 years ago. Edit 2. Everyone keeps bringing up Phineas Gage, but this guy didn't have any brain damage at all. And so the courier who had cheated death in the construction zone outside the freeway cheated death once again, and the anatomy seminar was forever changed. My resident called me urgently one night and said I needed to come to the hospital. A young man was cut in half by a train. I asked why I needed to come in. There was no way he could survive that. She explained that somehow he was maintaining his pressure and wasn't bleeding out. When I arrived, I found that the force of train had sealed off all the major vessels from the pelvis down. Crimped like a human tortellini. Why am I still reading this thread? Morbid curiosity. I need closure. So did he. 2 that stick out. Guy gets shot in the abdomen. Drops to his knees. Shooter puts one through the top of his head near his forehead. Bullet exits throughout his jaw. He wouldn't stop complaining about how much he hates that the guy who shot him, monsieur. Young girl driving a car gets T-boned on the passenger side by an Altima going at least 70 miles per hour. Her car looks like it was hit by an IED, so we assumed she was deceased upon arrival when the other crew on scene said our focus was extricating the people in the Altima. Girl driving was completely unhurt. Buy a Volvo. This is why the car talk guys would always recommend a Volvo to any caller asking about what car to get their teenager. Greater than truth is, the game was rigged from the start. Carrot edit. Carrot thanks, carrot kind, carrot stranger, carrot for carrot the carrot gold, carrot and carrot all, carrot that, carrot other, carrot r, award, speech edits, carrot stuff. Kind of a retelling. One time a cadaver on which I was performing an autopsy had a lung which was flipped upside down. When I tried to flip it to the proper position, bloop, it flipped right back to upside down. After some due diligence we realized the lung was a transplant, and the surgeons who performed the transplant had attached the organ incorrectly. The lung had been fighting to be upside down its whole life in this other man. After 15 or so years, the man eventually moved in a way that allowed it to flip over, resulting in his death. Not really a "how the fuck is this person still alive," but more of a "how the fuck did this person live this long with this condition?" Wow, that's really awful if the surgeon's mistake cost the guy his life. Older woman called 911 for chest pain. Her vital signs were shit and she had the look that anyone who's ever seen a patient about to die will recognize instantly. Her EKG suggested multiple blockages in her coronary arteries, and we had to put her on a ventilator shortly after she got to the ER because she deteriorated so quickly. Cath lab confirmed the EKG findings: complete blockage of one artery and 99% blockage of two other major arteries. Unfortunately, it was too extensive to resolve with PCI, so the only option was to fly her to the University Hospital in the city for an emergent triple bypass. It turned out that she'd had multiple episodes like this, but not quite as severe, over the last 6 months, and had refused bypass surgery not once, not twice, but 3 times in favor of a Mediterranean diet. Well, at this point she didn't have much say anymore and family agreed. So off to the OR she went. I took care of her again about 4 months later and she actually seemed to have made a remarkable recovery. She triple bypassed a triple bypass edit. Holy crap, my first gold and silver for this? Cool. I refuse to believe people are this witty in the middle of the night. As a student, had a young guy come in who self-inflicted a 22 to the inside of his mouth and passed out. Awoke the next morning. Didn't recall the night prior. Went to work. 2 hours into work he says he's not feeling right and starts acting odd. Coworkers call EMS, they take him in and the ED is working him up and in the process notices a mix of clear fluid and blood in the back of his mouth. They call in and get a CT head. Shows 11 or so bullet fragments throughout his noggin. The guy was acting by that time completely unfazed. I was very fazed. Working in an Aboriginal community, a woman walked in complaining of a head ACH behind her eye. She was told to take a seat and as she turned around she had a butter knife sticking out on the back of her skull. Apparently a drunk relative came home and stabbed her while she slept. Edit. Yes, she survived. Was flown back to Townsville for imaging, then on to Brisbane for surgery. How strong do you have to be to stab a butter knife through someone's skull? 7 strongs, or 3 strongs and 5 drunks. I helped take care of an old dude who had one leg amputated and had broken his other leg, so he was seeing us because of that. He was on oxygen and not being very compliant with using his wheelchair. We were talking with him and he was getting really argumentative. How am I supposed to chop wood in a wheelchair? Was what he kept demanding. When asked how he was chopping wood with one leg in the first place, he responded that he'd crawl into the woods and hop up to chop the wood. This was even more concerning. When the doctor asked how he was carrying his axe, oxygen, and the wood he chopped, he looked him straight in the eye and said, "I carry him on my back." Not sure if he was serious. but he was pretty dang grizzled and looked like he may have been crawling through the woods. So I'm imagining in my head a one-legged bear of a lumberjack with a face full of hair crawling through the woods in winter with eyes looking up and ahead, thirsting at the oak 100 meters from his cabin. Takes him an hour to crawl with 15 kilograms of life support equipment and a tree-killing axe. Does a one-arm push-jump from prone and fells the oak twice his width with one stroke. Ties all of the 50 meters oak to his waist with a chain and crawls back. Takes him half an hour. Any of the patients with flesh-eating bacterias and massive debridements. Those are always a good source of what the fuckery. One of my best friends had a small boil-like thing on the inside of his elbow. Told him to come back the next day for some surgery to get it lanced and stitched up. The next day he was on life support, where he remained for months. His kidneys were shutting down and they thought he'd need a transplant. Liver function was way down. His lungs weren't doing their lung thing and doctors couldn't quite figure out why. It was a no good, very bad time. Obviously the small boil on his elbow was actually the start of a staph infection, which made it necessary to flay his arm open from wrist to armpit. They thought they'd have to amputate and he very nearly died several times. He wound up with drop foot and several bed sores from the coma. And, inadequate care. However, he's alive, walking again, and even attending music festivals. The lesson of this story is, don't go swimming in a casino hot tub. You might wind up in a coma for months and need 2 years to gain basic functions back. Greater than his lungs weren't doing their lung thing. I see we have someone versed in medical terminology here. Not a doctor. A classmate of mine in HS was out snowmobiling in the middle of the night. He was going about 50 miles per hour down a trail. Some asshole had put a chain across the trail just to be an asshole. He didn't put reflectors on it and it wasn't even on his own land. It was on state land. Unfortunately, my classmate had a backrest on his sled. The chain hit him square across his chest. It slammed him into the backrest, which fortunately broke off. He rode back home and crawled into bed. Later, his mom made him go to the local clinic that had a smaller. They life-flighted him down to Duluth immediately. He had a ruptured spleen. Part of his liver was torn. His heart was badly bruised, and he had a collapsed lung. He was bleeding pretty bad internally. The doc told him that, if he hadn't been so muscular, he would have died out on the trail. The man was about 6 feet and 245 pounds and ripped like a bodybuilder when he started. 6 months and a bunch of surgeries later, he was maybe 130 pounds. He looked like death and his whole chest was railroad tracks. They had to crack his chest twice to deal with his heart and opened up his abdomen numerous times to deal with infections. Now, he's the same loud, crazy person he always was. A successful business owner with a wife and kids. Everyone thought he was going to die, including the doctors, but he pulled through. A few years ago my cousin was snowmobiling in New Brunswick the day of his daughter's christening. Some asshole put a wire across the trail and he was decapitated. Your classmate is extremely lucky. And fuck anyone who does something like that. Edit. Well, woke up to a ton of responses on this. The accident happened in 2007 on the NB Maine border. Thanks for all your responses and for your shared experiences. Unfortunately, no justice for my cousin, but everyone be careful out there when having fun out in the woods. There's evil people out there. I don't feel like asshole is a strong enough word. Maybe something like criminally insane evil cunt. I'm still fairly new in my training, but one of the first crazy recoveries I've seen. College kid was out drinking with his buddies and had a bit too much to drink. He presumably aspirates some of his vomit and it causes this massive inflammatory reaction in his lungs called ARDS. He goes from perfectly healthy to being on death's door within an hour. He gets transferred to our ICU in the middle of the night, completely unstable, on a ventilator. maxed out on 5 pressors, life support meds to keep your blood pressure up, and is being considered for ECMO. Edit. Basically like a temporary machine bypass of your heart and lungs, used as a last-ditch effort to save someone. His parents are on a last-minute flight from out of state with no bags packed to get to their son. Our team is concerned that he won't make it through the night, and brace his friends for the worst. The treatment for ARDS is actually something called proning, which is when you literally just flip the patient onto their stomach. And miraculously, 2 hours later he is off all pressors, maintaining his own blood pressure. And, while very sedated from all the meds, he's able to respond to voice and shake and nod his head to questions. He makes a full recovery 4 days later, and vowing to stay away from alcohol for a while. Edit. To translate the medicalese a bit, ARDS equals acute respiratory distress syndrome. ECMO equals extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. ICU equals intensive care unit. I'm imagining a $10K bill for flipping the dude onto his stomach. For me it was a guy who was cleaning his loaded shotgun and it blew half his face off, jaw and all. He was actually pretty good from the mid-nose up. The thing that surprised me is how good of shape he was in afterwards. He didn't even go to the ICU, we just admitted him to the med-surg floor. He was up communicating via whiteboard within a few hours and was adamant that he did not try to kill himself. Got a psych consult anyway, but they agreed. Another inch dorsal with the barrel of that gun and he would have been done for. This is why you treat guns as always loaded, folks. Even if you personally just unloaded the gun, it is still loaded. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.